Hello and welcome to the latest in our series of videos lessons on Irish history. Today we're looking at the rather understated emergency in Ireland from 1939 to 1949, better known as the period of World War II. Now, was it known as the emergency in Ireland to try and downplay the severity maybe, but nevertheless, as we said, it is perhaps the most famous understatement in Irish history. So before we go into this, we have to look at a couple of things today, like why and how did Ireland stay neutral? How did the government deal with the problems of the emergency? What were relations like with the Allies? And what were the results of World War II for Ireland? Let's take a deep dive, shall we? So, World War II began on the 3rd of September 1939, when Britain declared war on Germany. All political parties in Ireland supported neutrality. The Dáil itself passed the Emergency Powers Act to ensure that Ireland remained neutral. It gave the government enormous powers, so newspapers were censored so that there was no news about the war that may favour any one side. Weather forecasts were not allowed, as they might help either side in military operations such as bombing. The period of World War II, therefore, was known as the emergency in Ireland. Why did the government choose neutrality, though? Number one, if Ireland became involved in the war, it could result in a widespread destruction and loss of life. Secondly, people did not want to fight on the side of Britain because of the issue of partition. And thirdly, it would show that Ireland was independent of Britain. So what were these threats to neutrality, though? First one, of course, as we mentioned in our previous video, would be the IRA. In 1939, the IRA started a bombing campaign in Britain. They got in contact with Germany and several German spies were sent to Ireland. All of them were arrested. De Valera was afraid that the activities of the IRA would put Irish neutrality at risk by giving Britain an excuse to invade Ireland. So as a result, he imprisoned over 500 IRA members. And Ireland came up with its own measures to try and deal with the emergency. The first thing was the Defence Forces themselves. Now, by 1940, the Irish Army had increased itself to a measly 37,000 men. The government, in response to this, also set up the Local Defence Force, the LDF, which eventually numbered around 250,000 people. The aim was to train young people to fight in case Ireland was invaded. They were a part-time force and they were poorly equipped. So if we had gone into the war officially on the side of Germany or Britain, we would have been beaten quite easily. Now, in terms of food supplies, due to Ireland's neutrality, Britain limited the goods, such as tea, that was carried to Ireland. Sean Lemass was appointed Minister for Supplies, and he set up the Irish Shipping Limited to bring essential supplies from abroad. However, there were still severe shortages due to German U-boat, submarine, activity at sea, and as a result, rationing was introduced. People were given ration books for goods such as tea, flour, and butter. Farmers were ordered to grow more wheat for flour, and this was called the compulsory tillage scheme, but despite these measures, there was still great hardship. And there were fuel shortages. Petrol was scarce and available only to doctors and priests. In Dublin, gas was used for cooking, but it was rationed. Men called the Glimmermen were appointed to ensure that people used only the amount of gas and electricity that was allowed. Coal was also scarce, as Britain needed all of her coal during the war. The trains were powered by turf from the Irish bogs rather than by coal, but the trains took much longer to complete a journey, and perhaps as an insight to what the transport revolution would have been like had it started in Ireland. People from towns and cities went out to the bogs in summer to cut enough turf to provide heat for the winter. Many factories were closed due to the lack of energy and the lack of raw materials, and many of those who lost their jobs had emigrated to Britain to find work. Now, looking at Ireland's relationship with the Allies. Britain was unhappy with Ireland's decision to stay neutral. When Churchill became Prime Minister of Britain in 1940, he wanted the former treaty ports to be used as naval bases to protect convoys bringing vital supplies to Britain. Convoys were groups of cargo ships with warships to protect them against the German U-boats. De Valera refused, as he felt it would endanger Ireland's neutrality. Churchill promised De Valera that he would reunify Ireland if it entered the war on Britain's side, but that clearly wasn't feasible. De Valera had rejected this idea partly because he felt that Churchill would not be able to deliver reunification due to the strength of the Unionist opposition. So when the Allies began using Northern Ireland's ports as naval bases, the threat of Britain taking over the treaty ports by force had disappeared. Now, after the Americans entered the war in 1941, they were also against Ireland being neutral. The Americans themselves were afraid that the South was full of German spies who observed American troops in Northern Ireland. So Ireland had what we called a pro-Allied neutrality, though. Now, one of the main reasons why the Allies didn't invade the South was because Irish neutrality had favoured the Allies. When Allied pilots crashed, they were sent back over the border to Northern Ireland. German pilots were imprisoned. Fire brigades were sent to Belfast after it had been bombed by the Nazis in 1941. Weather reports were secretly sent to the British so they could plan their air movements, and over 50,000 Irishmen joined the British Army. Now, very few people were aware of this, even the British ambassador in Dublin himself. This was to ensure that there was no threat to Irish neutrality. The Germans were unable to invade Ireland, as Britain would have to be taken over first. In 1941, German bombers hit the North Strand area of Dublin, allegedly on accident. 28 people were killed and 300 houses were damaged. Germany apologised and offered reparations, but most likely it was seen as a thinly veiled threat to Ireland to not get involved in the war, or otherwise this would be a regular occurrence. So it comes to the end of World War II, and the war itself ended in May 1945. De Valera maintained his policy of neutrality to the end. When Roosevelt, the American president, died, he went to the US Embassy to express his condolences. Similarly, when Hitler died, he went to the German Embassy to express his condolences, perhaps nearly going too far to show how neutral Ireland was, in the context of what we know about Hitler now, in hindsight. This angered the Allies. So after the war, Churchill stated in a speech that Ireland should be grateful that the Allies had not invaded them. De Valera, quite brilliantly, had the response that Ireland had fought Britain for 800 years on her own, just as Britain had been on her own against Germany. His speech was highly praised in Ireland. So what were the results of World War II in Ireland? Ireland escaped the death and destruction that occurred in Europe. The economy suffered greatly, and it did take several years for it to improve, but the neutrality policy widened the gap between the North and the South, making unification even more unlikely. The British were grateful for the North for its vital role in the war and would support the wishes of the Unionist population. That's all for today's video. We'll see you again soon with another one. Take care. Goodbye.